join us. Right. I'm Roberta Bricolo, President of Consortium of Custoza Wine. We are very happy for this excellent opportunity to introduce you to our appellation and to celebrate the 50th anniversary of its foundation. So today, we will explore the potential of our territory and the blend of native grapes, which together give life to Custoza wine in its different results and shades, as we will see, ranging from the freshness of the youngest vintages to the complexity of those that are the result of longer aging. But this is possible thanks to the talent, I can say, and knowledge of our special relator, Mr. Henry Davar, who will guide us in this tasting journey through the lands that stretch between Verona and Garda Lake. But I want to introduce you also to our communication manager, Mr. Costantino Gabardi, who will tell you about the origin of these wines, which are the results of our art of blending, I can say, and expression of a unique terroir rich in history and tradition. So I remain totally available for any question you might have. Like all my colleagues here, all the winemakers are online, so ready to support you, Henry. But now I ask you, please, to take care of this and help us discover this Custoza wines, of course.
Thank you, Roberta. Welcome everybody to our seminar today. Good afternoon, morning, or evening, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us. As Roberta mentioned, my name is Henry Davar. I am the faculty at the Vinitaly International Academy, where we focus on a very high level of education for Italian wines to wine professionals, educators, and writers from around the world. So I'm very honored and happy to be able to make this presentation to you, partially because I'm a big advocate of Italian wines, and especially because I'm a huge lover of Italian white wines. Now, when we teach Italian white wines at the Vinitaly International Academy, we ask a little bit more of our students as far as tasting goes. And we'll get into some of those factors that we incorporate into our tasting sessions when we begin our tasting today. But Roberta's already introduced Costantino Gabardi. He will introduce some of the history, theory, and the nitty-gritty details about the appellation and the appellation laws of Custoza DOC, as well as the varieties. And we will continue from that point with a guided tasting led by myself, of course, with input from Costantino Gabardi, and of course, with input from some of our producer representatives who have joined us on this our webcast today. So with that, I do want to say a few words about our sponsors today. This seminar is sponsored with the support of, everybody can see the screen, I hope, right? With an organization known as European Quality Wines Taste the Difference. The Italians love their acronyms, so ttd.eu is a program that is funded by the European Union, implemented by Unione Italiana Vini, which is our native or Italian partner in this endeavor, and Promotore de Exportaciones Catalanas, which is our Spanish partner. This is a 3-year promotion campaign that aims to increase awareness by trade, influencers, and consumers about Italian and Spanish quality wines. We're talking about PDO and PGI level of quality through the enhancement of awareness and perceived quality by those players in the marketplace. Another word about Unione Italiana Vini. It is the oldest and most trusted organization in Italian wine. The association includes members such as cooperatives, private wineries, agricultural organizations, bottlers, consortia, brewing machines, and laboratories. Notably, its members account for more than 50% of the total turnover of Italian wine and 85% of Italian wine exports. Our Spanish partner, Prodeca, has its own numbers here. This is a public company established in 1986 and added to the Department of Agriculture, Livestock, Fisheries, and Food of the government of the Generalitat de Catalunya. And finally, how to recognize EU quality schemes. Many of you will know that the European Union has instituted new quality designations known as PDO and PGI. As far as Italian wines are concerned, we're allowed to grandfather in the quality pyramid that many of you may have learned when you started studying Italian wine. Of course, PDO would refer to DOC and DOCG wines, whereas PGI would be referring to what we know as IGP or IGT wines. With that, I'm going to begin to turn over the seminar to Costantino Gabbardi, who will give us a little bit of background about Custoza, the place, and the heritage of winemaking here before we get into our tasting. Costantino, you're on mute at the moment. You want to unmute yourself? We can begin.
You see me? I'm very
Yes.
sorry. I have a big trouble with the electricity in my house this evening. I'm very sorry. Nice to meet you. Good evening. And this evening we are this morning for you, I think we are speaking about Custoza wine and Custoza land. Custoza wine is a white, crispy, and light aromatic wine in Italy, and is positioned. I'm sorry, because you listen a beep.
Yes.
We can hear the beep, but
Yes.
you can continue if it's something you can fix in a few moments. It's not really bothering us. If you need a few moments, I can make the first introduction while you get ready, or if you want to continue, please continue.
Okay. And Custoza is a small land just in the southeast coast of Garda Lake, and is composed by soils with clay, lime.
Looks like we might have lost Costantino. I'm going to continue. If he gets back on, we'll let him know where I left off. So as far as the geography here, we're talking about Northwest Italy. We're in the Veneto. We're in the province of Verona. And as Costantino was beginning to say, we're essentially on the southeast coast of Lago di Garda, where between the city of Verona and Lago di Garda, roughly 40 kilometers maximum from the actual city center of Verona. Notably, neighboring appellations include Bardolino, Valpolicella, Soave, Lugana, and the larger appellation of Garda itself. We'll talk a little about differences between the important white wine appellations I just mentioned, notably Soave and Lugana, and our Custoza DOC. A little bit of history about Custoza itself. Custoza is a municipality within the town of Sommacompagna. We'll get into some of the townships located here in just a moment, but historically, Custoza was an ancient guard post which overlooked the Via Postumia, built in the 13th century during the wars between Mantua and Verona. This idea of Via Postumia is tempting, but it's a false conceit when we talk about the varieties. If you look up Via Postumia on Google, or Wikipedia, in fact, there's a beautiful map on Wikipedia that shows the Via Postumia. It's an ancient Roman road that essentially ran from Genoa through Alessandria province in Piemonte, connecting with the Via Emilia, which is probably the more famous Roman road, at Piacenza, then running to Verona, and then all the way out to Aquileia. When we talk about the varieties, it's tempting to think that there's this ancient 2,000-year heritage of varieties. We're essentially connecting the Gavi area to the Veronese area to the Friulano area, where we'll demystify some of these varieties as well. But don't go down that path, because it's an incorrect path, although there is that heritage there. we know that the viticultural prehistory dates back even earlier than that, to the early Bronze Age. So think 5,000 years ago, when we found Vitis sylvestris seeds found in conjunction with ancient tile dwellings near the lake. Now, we know that Vitis sylvestris seeds, the seeds from the wild vine, may have been due to a pre-domestication type of viticulture. We know that domestication arrived in Italy pretty much with the Greeks. So fast forwarding another 2,000 years. Around that same time, we know that in this area, there were a tribe known as the Reti, or the Raetians, who are thought to be derived perhaps from the Etruscans, but the Reti actually managed trade in this area, even beyond the Alps. So their heritage, their culture links commercially the Valtellina to Trentino, Alto Adige, and Verona. At least these are the names we know these areas by today. These Raetian wines were documented by Roman writers, especially Cato the Elder and Pliny the Elder, who writes that Raetian wines were considered by Virgil second only to the famous wine of Falerno. And from there, we can extrapolate to what Raetian wines might have become. But it's with the arrival of the Romans, this area became a center of vine domestication. So you have this rich viticultural heritage here, and you have a lot of varieties, grape varieties that were born in this area and traded throughout this area. It's beginning in the 9th century and then throughout the Middle Ages, where we start to see abundant documentation on the cultivation of vines in this particular area around Custoza, specifically between Pastrengo and Somma Campagna. And then it's only in the second half of the 19th century that wine production in the area begins to be explicitly identified with the name of Custoza. More recent historically, to the late 19th century, Custoza is often celebrated for being the site of two famous battles in the Italian Wars of Independence. One fought in 1848 and another fought in 1866 against the Austrian Empire. The Italians didn't necessarily win those wars, but at least with the end of the Third War of Independence, the Austrians ended up ceding the area around the Veneto and Verona and Friuli to Italy. So that's a little bit of the history of this area. I don't see Costantino back, so I will continue. As I mentioned, the appellation encompasses 9 municipalities: Somma Campagna, Villafranca di Verona, Valeggio sul Mincio. Mincio is actually the river that runs from right around Peschiera del Garda and forms the westernmost boundary of the appellation. Sona, Bussolengo, Lazizze, Pastrengo, Peschiera del Garda. Peschiera del Garda, you know, overlaps with the Lugana appellation, and Castelnuovo del Garda. Importantly, the appellation encompasses several types. Of course, there's Custoza DOC, the simple, fruity, young wine. There's a Custoza Reserva that requires 12 months of aging. And importantly for our tasting today is Custoza Superiore, which requires 5 months of aging, but does require lower yields as well. And I think Roberta had mentioned earlier that Custoza Superiore is an area where winemakers get to kind of strut their stuff. And I think the wines show that here as well. So it'll be interesting to make a distinction, to hear what you think about the distinction between these two typologies within the Custoza appellation. Of course, there's also a Custoza Spumonte and a Custoza Passito, which we're not going to address today. Two major points about the Custoza DOC: it's a white wine appellation exclusively, and two, it focuses solely on blends. So if you see a Custoza DOC wine of any typology, it's going to be a white wine, and it's going to be a blended wine. The rules are visible on your slide. To be clear, the wines must be a blend of at least 3 grapes. So just to get through the rules here, the main grapes are Garganega, Trebbianello, which is a local biotype of Tokai Friulano. Remember that Via Postumia begins on the eastern side in Aquile and Friuli. Again, but don't go down that road. Bianca Fernanda, which is a local biotype of Cortese. And I was told that this particular biotype is an especially aromatic biotype. as far as especially goes in the case of non-aromatic varieties. Trebbiano Toscano is the fourth. So these grapes must comprise a minimum of 70% of the blend. However, no individual grape variety can exceed 45% of the total blend. So 45 and 45 gives you a total of 90. So 10%, another 10% must come from another grape from within this family or from other grapes, which are allowed to up to a maximum of 30%. Those grapes, of course, are Chardonnay, Pinot Bianco, Malvasia. Malvasia is included in the appellation rules because Malvasia had been planted here for some time, so they incorporated it. It's really limited to plantings, random plantings in the vineyards, and typically it's a Malvasia lunga, the Malvasia of the Chianti appellation that you will find grown here. Riesling, and in fact, it's both Welsh Riesling and Rhine Riesling, which are included in the appellation laws. And finally, Incrocio Manzoni, Manzoni Bianco, which then we'll actually taste one wine that includes a small percentage of Incrocio Manzoni in the blend as well. Just to compare and contrast with the neighboring appellations, Lugana is essentially a single varietal wine, which focuses solely on Trebbiano di Soave. So important point of distinction between that neighbor. And Soave itself, which has to be a minimum of 70% Garganega, often found also as a varietal wine. Again, just to make that point of distinction between those two appellations, which and Custoza DOC. Moving along, the terroir. When we talk about the area of Lago di Garda, we're talking about morainic soils. What is a moraine? What are moraines? Moraines are glacial soils. So you can imagine a glacier making its way down a valley, right? It's the glacier that actually carved out what we now know as Lago di Garda. And these glacial periods actually, or the glacier actually descended and receded over multiple times, over multiple glaciations throughout the Pleistocene epoch, right? So you can imagine a glacier making its way down the mountain, carrying sediment with it, and eventually receding back. As it makes its way down the valley, rather, it's pushing along sediment, which it eventually drops. And when we talk about moraines, we're talking about this mass of unsorted rock and sediment, which is known as till. So till is unsorted rock and sediment, which is carried down and deposited by the glacier, typically ending up as ridges at the glacier's end. So as at the maximum extent of the glacier, you have a ridge form, and the glacier will recede. And then with the next glaciation, if it perhaps doesn't proceed as far south during that glaciation, you'll have another set of ridges formed further north from that original set of ridges. That's exactly what we have here in Lago di Garda. The most relevant glaciations we're talking about are known as the Ris Glaciation. These names come from rivers further north in Germany, I think in both of these cases, whose max extension was 130,000 years ago. Now, if you were to see it in a graphic, you would see that the Ris Glaciation, the moraines that are affected by the Ris Glaciation, created by the Ris Glaciation, actually overlap the area right up at Custoza. A later glaciation known as the Worm, which ended 15,000 years ago, doesn't quite make it as far south, but you can imagine these overlapping tongues, if you will, of low hills. When we talk about these morainic ridges or morainic hills, we're only talking about altitudes that climb up to maybe 150 meters at the most. Typically, I think 50 to 100 meters is max here. Roberta, you have something to add?
No, it's right. We are around 100, 150. That's perfect.
They're not very high, but they do affect the topography and the landscape. Notably, another perhaps not so relevant fact about morainic soils here is that the type of soil you have beyond the ridge and on the glacial side of the ridge is not uniform. So you have essentially meltwater, which carries sediment along on the far side of the moraine, which differentiates that soil type from the soil type of the moraine itself. And then you have different type of sediment on the north side, if you will, of the moraine as well. So it's not uniform as it sounds when I talk about morainic soil, but when we do talk about these morainic ridges, what we want to feature is because it's the rocks and sediment is unsorted, you have great drainage. You have excellent drainage, which controls the vigor of the wine. So we'd say that the morainic soils are light and loose, often rich in gravel, which ensures excellent drainage. We do say that the composition is mainly calcareous. Think about the Dolomites and all of the limestone from which this glacier is bringing deposits down Lake Garda. You can understand why it's mainly calcareous, or at least I'm surmising so. Okay, so to summarize, glacial morainic soil, well drained, controls vigor, but not necessarily uniform throughout the area. Moving along for climate, we know very well that the climate in this area is well moderated by Lago di Garda, which evens out some of the extremes of temperature in the wintertime, and in the summertime moderates some of the heat of the central part of Italy, allowing for a elongated growing season, allowing our grapes to balance their alcoholic ripening with their physiologic ripening, as well as development of terpenes and aromatic characteristics. I think for some tasters, they think that grapes need to be harvested young in order to preserve aromatics. It doesn't always work that way. It takes time for these grapes to develop their terpenes. So sometimes extending the harvest for certain grapes will actually produce a higher level of aromatic compounds as well. But as far as the climate goes, the production area in the white wines Custoza is typically rather homogeneous in that case. Roberta, do you have anything to say about the morainic ridges here? An important note in the Disciplinare is that viticulture is limited to the hills and the foothills of these ridges. Is that consistent?
I mean, it's a natural choice. It's, you know, as we say, the Disciplinare, the rules have been written after the wine was born. And naturally, we could find the best place. And for each variety, we even had the experience of the best place we can cultivate it. So we will afford later the sense of art of blending is also the knowledge, the deep knowledge of the style of soil we have. And the exposition as well, the sun exposition as well works. So it's a specific culture and knowledge that we could learn in many times, many years. So we already turned 50s as appellation, but much more as time we cultivate vines here.
Thank you. So note on the Custoza wine, I think the marketing team at Custoza did a great job with identifying the typical characteristics of Custoza wines. They focus on freshness, a light aromaticity, fruity and sapid notes, which I think will make for interesting discussion in our wine. Very versatile wine, extremely enjoyable for its drinkability and ease in pairing. Keep all those things in mind if you haven't tasted the wines yet, and keep coming back to this identity of what Custoza DOC is. I think you'll find it consistent with the wines we're tasting today. Finally, as far as numbers go, the surface area of the appellation is 1,400 hectares. Again, to give you a little bit of scale, Lugana is about 2,000 hectares and Suave DOC is about 4,000 hectares. So 1,400 hectares for Custoza with a production in 2020 of about 102,000 hectoliters. That's roughly 1.1 million 9-liter cases of wine. And again, it's about a fourth the size of Suave and just a little bit less than Lugana, if you will. Notable here, we have 60 wineries making wine with 85 bottling companies. This is a question I had that maybe Roberta, you can answer. 480 winemakers, are they all employed?
Now, the meaning is growers. I mean, it's not winemakers. Okay. That's the wrong translation. Okay. Growers who confers to the big wineries or small wineries. So
I was going to say that's a lot of consultants.
Yeah, right.
With that, I think we can begin our tasting. Roberta, is there something that you think we should add as far as the history, background, heritage of Custoza DOC that I haven't covered in the presentation thus far before we move to the tasting?
Sorry.
Is there something that you would like to add at this point
To
about
add,
the appellation?
yeah, I was thinking about while we were talking about the terroir, morainic hills, we forgot maybe to explain clearly that it confers a special style and character into the wines. In all the wines you're gonna try and taste tonight, you will recognize that special style of savory we call sapidity in this area. That's the leaving a kind of salty, fine result and mineral notes. So two characters that comes from the terroir, from the soil. And together the blend of grapes will enrich the bouquet in different shades, and depending on the vinification technique, you will get different results that of course you can choose, prefer, and try later during the tasting. So we have a complexity thanks to the natural character of our area and our hills and land. This is very important. Thank you very much, Henry.
Before we begin, I want to talk about the methodology that I bring to tasting wine. At Vinitaly International Academy, we've developed what's called the Via Tasting Grid. Now, for those of you who are familiar with deductive tasting, whether from the Court of Master Sommeliers or WSET or other organizations, you'll see this is an adapted tasting grid. The areas I'd like to focus on today are several. One, of course, we're trying to define as a group here what typicity is. Now, we've already laid out a thesis for what is a typical Custoza wine, and we're looking to confirm whether that thesis holds. I've tasted the wines quickly before, and it seems to certainly hold. There's a wonderful freshness, a delicate aromaticity, and we'll get into some of the other highlights of what Custoza DOC succeeds in transmitting. But for us as an Italian wine lover, we bring a real fine spotlight to aromas. Now, with quote unquote neutral or non-aromatic varieties, I don't think people pay enough attention to the nuances and the actual complexity that comes in with some of these aromatic characters. And I think with a lot of Italian white wines, it pays to pay just a little bit closer attention to what the wine is showing. Also, it pays to pay attention because it'll let you know how sensitive some of our winemakers are to the materials that they're actually working with. One of the tools that we focus on often is lees aging or lees stirring in Italian wines. And what I've noticed in these wines is how little they depend, at least in the Custoza DOC wines, on this for building character, because the aromatics are so nuanced that I think too much lee stirring would upset the balance. So I noted some arrows here to really, let's focus on those quality factors like balance, like intensity, like complexity, like concentration, to see how well these winemakers, these producers are actually doing in making their wines. You'll find that there's a charm to the level of sensitivity that these producers have brought to the wines of their area. I've also highlighted on this chart here, this part for tannin or texture. Oftentimes in Italian white wines, especially if there's a level of even semi-aromaticity, you'll find that winemakers will employ tools to bring out that aromatic character. Now, granted, some of our Italian white varieties are naturally actually tannic, so it'll bring texture of their own. But sometimes some of the techniques that winemakers might use to bring out additional aromaticity in varieties that may not be as aromatic will bring texture along with it. And of course, it can be done with a lot of finesse, but it also could be done very crudely. I think you'll find here that there's great finesse in trying to coax out aromas of these wines without necessarily bringing a lot of texture. Texture isn't a bad thing, but it's something to pay attention to when tasting Italian wines. or so we try to teach. Roberto already mentioned the sapidity. Again, I would encourage you to pay attention to the balance between floral, fruity, and savory elements, whether those are lees-derived or whether they're that salty residue that Roberta had mentioned earlier. Of course, pay attention to how these producers are building body in the wine. And of course, we'll end up with a note on typicity. So we'll begin. Everybody should have the lineup of wines already. We're going to proceed in the order as follows. Sei Terre, moving along to Cavegrar, then Tamburino Sardo, and then we have Gorgo, and then Monte del Fra, and then finally Menegotti, just for clarification in case you haven't gotten this information. So we'll begin with Sei Terre. This is one of our wines that is actually imported into the United States. They're imported into Pennsylvania and New York, looking to expand in the Dakotas, Oklahoma, Nebraska, and Kansas. The Sei Terre is a family-owned winery whose history dates back to 1877 in Trentino. They expanded throughout the 20th century, and in the 1960s, they expanded to Verona province, where the company is headquartered today. Sei Terre is from the word six in Italian. They own cellars in 6 different wine regions. And this Amerigo Vespucci bottling is part of a 6 Explorers line dedicated to 6 Italian explorers. For this wine, we have a blend. I didn't list the varietal blends here, quantities. I can give them to you. I think the focus, again, on blending rather than individual varieties. But for those who do care, Garganega 40%, Cortese 40%, Trebbiano Toscano 10%, and Tokai. I'm sorry, I'm reading to the wrong. Take that back. Sei Terre, Garganega 40, Trebbiano 20, Tokai 15, Cortese 15, Chardonnay 10. The grapes here are fermented together. They do see a short cryomaceration prior to fermentation. And I think cryomaceration, again, getting those grapes cool, not only allows for a cooler ferment to some degree, but also allows for a little bit of skin maceration to coax out perhaps some of the aromas in that bottling. So one thing to note as well about all 6 wines, since you have them all in front of you, look at the color. In the marketing materials, you'll see messaging about straw, and indeed, most of these wines do fall into that straw distinction with green highlights. The one exception here, the one that tends to a little bit deeper in hue, would be the wine from Roberta, her Gorgo wine, which can probably fall into more of a lemon, but still has that green reflection as well. So pretty consistent throughout at least the Custoza DOC wines as strong color. Let's nose and see what these wines smell and taste like without the offer. I'm not going to go through the whole grid as we have it, but I think it's important to talk about some of the notable characteristics of the wines. Again, first thing I note is the intensity and complexity of the aromas. In this case, I would call this a moderate plus intensity. Again, we're not dealing with necessarily aromatic varieties, but these varieties nevertheless do bring some level of terpenes, and it's our job, I guess, to pick out what those characteristics are. Certainly, there's notes of white flowers. As far as fruit goes, lime, lemon, citrus, perhaps green apple and white stone fruit, especially when we get it on the palate. This note of white stone fruit really seems to blossom on the palate, where you get suggestions. Again, we're not talking about high intensity or high concentrations of apricot and nectarine. There's a hint of almost a peach pit-like characteristic that I typically associate with another variety, Viognier. But there is that really nuanced aromatic character to these wines. Of course, no tasting note would be complete without some consideration of terroir. There is a note of wet stone on the wine. There's also a very sensible savoriness that's coming from the in this case, minimal work with the leaves. But, you know, we note all of these fruity or floral characteristics in the wine, but there's a baseline, there's a base note here, right? That is providing the rhythm, if you will, for the wine. And that's coming from a little bit of these. It's not outright toasty per se, but it's a savory counterpoint. Perhaps it's the sapidity that Roberta had been referring to. And in fact, if it is in fact the sapidity, the salinity that Roberta had been referring to, think about how sensitive the winemaking has to be to bring that out without having the lees work interfere with that. So it's a matter of balances. It's quite remarkable. So
Harry?
Yes.
Um,
Oh, Costantino's back.
I'm back.
Is that a candle or is that a light?
I'm back from the phone. I'm very sorry.
I'm sorry, sir.
Apologize me. I'm sorry. But
Should we begin again?
Oh, no. I have listened what you say about this one, and it's so correct and so perfect, like a description. And I have just one thing to say. Is that I don't know if Roberta says this so small, but so important changing during the history of Custoza, that in 2010 all the producers decide to keep off the Garganega from the wood to the still. Since 2010, all the producer makes Garganega in oak. 2010 is like a big change in the Custoza blend, in the interpretation of the blend of Custoza, that Garganega arrived finally in stainless steel. For this reason, we have so crispy wine, like you says, of Custoza area.
Thank you, Costantino. Again, that crispiness, that freshness that we saw in quotes on a previous slide really comes through. And as we make it through our flight today, I think I hope you'll agree.
So mineral,
and also a nice spectrum of flavors. Again, we are dealing with a blend of varieties, and we're moving our meters, so to speak, from very high acid expressions such as lemon lime, moving into citrus, and then stopping pretty much at white stone fruit, this peach pit characteristic. But it's all there. You just have to pay attention to it. There is distinct floral note as well, and I think again it's well balanced for what it does. Again, we're talking about nuance here. As far as concentration, it's moderate, very well balanced, moderate length as well. Again, there is a nice expression of that savory mineral note. I called it wet stone. You called it mineral, but it does come through.
Yeah,
very
absolutely.
Nice. Let's move along to wine number 2. Oh, and yes, Cantina Castelnuovo de Garda, del Garda, Custoza DOC. Delgado. Cavegar is an acronym, if you will, or shortened expression that refers to Cantina Sociale Veronese del Garda. This is a cooperative winery founded in 1958 that today works with 200 growers who represent 1,000 hectares of vineyard area. Under this label, the Cantina Castelnuovo del Garda, Cavegar makes several wines, including the Custoza, but also Lugana, Valpolicella, Garda, and Bardolino. This wine here is a blend of 40% Garganega, 40 Trebbiano, 15 Cortese, and 5 Friulano. Again, noting the visual inspection, we have a straw wine with green highlights. Here we're pushing that meter of aromatic spectrum more into that stone fruit realm, right? We're getting more evident notes of nectarine and apricot, perhaps pear, yellow apple, green plum, but there's still white flowers, a hint of lime leaf, if you will. Maybe a hint of something green growing. I think fern is an excellent expression that's often not used enough in Italian wines. Again, that fern adds a nice savory, sapid counterpoint to the more voluminous, if you will, fruity aromas in this wine, as opposed to perhaps the Sei Terre wine. Again, freshness here is the hallmark of this wine, with acidity providing structure. This wine, again, it really relies on acidity for its structure, but nevertheless, it's well balanced as far as texture goes. There is a light astringency here. There's almost a light chalkiness to this wine, which again speaks to perhaps the sapidity that Roberto had mentioned previously.
It's very crispy.
It is, but there's more flesh on this wine. I often encourage my tasters to leave the wine on the palate a little bit, let it loll around, if you will, on your tongue to get a sense of how much texture is actually coming from the wine. Not necessarily staying texture in an astringent way, but perhaps a sense of oiliness that can be built either through the level of extract in the grapes, but also through judicious lees aging that can build texture as well, without necessarily contributing those typically leesy aromas. And I think this wine relies less on those lees for aromas than it does here to build texture. Again, a fruity style. My notes were really about the purity of the flavors and aromas in this wine. They shine through, and they're really well delineated. Costantino?
Yeah, for me, this is there's more citrus than the other. Is a very crispy and the sensation of salt of the fine, very fine salty sensation is well balanced with the white fruity expression of the wine. Good structure for me, and is very deep. It's very long in the mouth. The sensation, and I think that this wine can be aging a few months in a bottle to have more roundness also.
Yeah. Notable as well that because Tito's talking about this texture and the length. It's been about 20 seconds since I've swallowed, and the mouth is still salivating. But you never get the impression that the acidity is out of balance here. The acidity is high, but it works so well with the texture of the wine and also the concentration of the grapes. You know, the extract is spot on. So when we talk about this really nuanced winemaking, these are the types of things that I celebrate as an Italian wine lover, in that you're working in the winery to coax out flavors and aromas out of these grapes, while not overpowering them with winemaking, so to speak. So again, this wine does see 4 months in steel with periodic batonnage, and here you can tell, but they managed it without necessarily upsetting those really I called them charming earlier, these charming aromas, the charming varietal aromas. Great, off to a good start. Wine number 3.
Yeah.
Tamburino Sardo. Again, in this case, we have a family-owned winery that's making wines throughout the area. So they're making Custoza, Bardolino, and Valpolicella wines. We mentioned earlier about the wars of Italian Risorgimento and the name Tamburino Sardo pays homage to a person of the name Tamburino Sardo, hero of the 1848 war against the Austrians. For those of you who do have tech sheets at your disposal, note that the varietal mix has been updated via correspondence with the producer. So the varietal mix as it stands for the 2020 version of Tamburino Sardo Custoza DOC is 40% Garganega, 40% Bianca Fernanda, 10% Trebbiano Toscano, and 10% Tokai Friulano, aka Trebbianello. Here we have a short crier maceration followed by fermentation at 10 to 12 degrees Celsius, which is on the cool side for the flight of wines we have here. Most of the wines will be fermented about 16 degrees. I don't think that necessarily impacted the flavors and aromas of the wine. We'll double check again in just a moment. The wine spends about 3 to 6 months in stainless steel with lees stirred 1 to 2 times per week. Immediately, you should be noticing something different about this wine versus the prior two. Here you have a very leesy, very flinty, almost smoky character that supports the stone fruit flavors and aromas. The fruits pushed into even perhaps riper expression. You still have the ripe citrus, again, apricots, nectarine. The florals here are quite distinct too. We moved away from white flowers. We're more into honeysuckle, maybe not quite frangipani of southern Italy, but certainly moving into something sweeter, perhaps something suggesting more exotic than we'd experienced before. Again, with all of that leesy savor, you should expect a textural correspondence, just like we had with the previous wine and their efforts at lees stirring. But here you have the aromatic component that comes with that lees work that went into making this wine.
Is it sweeter than the other at the nose?
Mm-hmm.
With some some tropical white fruit like lychees.
Yeah, my note here was exotic. It was more reference to the flowers, but on the palate as well, it's a mouthful. And here we're tending towards, again, warmth as well as glycerin. Notably, the acidity is still medium plus to high, but it's covered. It's covered by extract. It's covered by the work with the lees. The intensity and concentration is ratcheted up here as well. Here we also have added complexity from those flinty, savory notes. Now, I think when you have a level of fruit ripeness, I'm guessing that it's ripeness, deducing that it's ripeness, and concentration, perhaps the wine can stand up to some of these added components that give this wine added complexity. But nevertheless, it's impeccably balanced, and the finish is long on this wine. I'm not saying that it wasn't long on previous wines, but it's certainly notably long here. It almost has a sensuous texture as well. I think this wine is building as far as what producers are capable of, as far as how they choose to elaborate their wines into our conception of what Custoza Superiore will eventually reveal itself to be. But start thinking in that direction, because I think the efforts, when we talk about the Superiore wines, are hinted at in a wine like this Tamburino Sardo Custoza DOC. It's quite lovely. With the next wine, I get to take a break because, well, our winemaker is with us today, and you've met her already. Gorgo. Just a quick note on Gorgo. This wine was founded in 1975 and is currently led by our very own Roberta Bricolo, who I will pass the mic over to you. One note I hadn't mentioned before, and we'll mention here because your wine is a vino biologico. There is an effort, however, throughout the area for sustainability. So perhaps maybe, Roberta, you can talk a little bit about that while introducing your estate and the wine.
Well, about my winery, I mean, in general, as a consortium, so there is a very big interest and attention from all the wineries of our consortium about sustainable program. And as a consortium, we have already organized special courses, lessons with the support of agronomists, also to go into the special, I don't know if you know the SQNP certification label is what is going to be the sustainable Italian rules that will be even very close, very recently will be approved definitely. Anyway, what I want to say, we are very interested in this argument, in this feeling, and personally, as owner of the winery, I've decided to convert my hectares into the organic agriculture in 2014. So since 2018, all the wines, all the property is certified. We cultivate 53 hectares, which are around 140 acres. So San Michelin is an old vine. We talk about 55, 60 years old vines, and we do vinificate altogether the grapes coming from this special hill, like a crow, called the San Michelin, because there is a church devoted to St. Michael on the top of this hill. And it's a blend, of course, as all the Custoza. So Garganega, Fernanda, Trebbiano, but there is Riesling. I know you are very curious about why Riesling is here, right? You wrote us. Of course, but as we said before, Riesling, like the complementary grapes that we mentioned that are allowed by the rules, the disciplinary of the Custoza, is what we found since the beginning when, for example, my grandfather has bought the land. So it's part of our culture. It's not anything that we have planted in the time. And in this way, we talk about a natural cuvée, a natural blend. The percentage, of course, is small, but for us is part of this wine and enriched in a special way. For my personal feeling, for me that I know the wine, of course, I can get apricot, peach, so the yellow fruits, much more the white of the regular Custoza I do have as well. And I like Riesling with Fernanda when we wait and enjoy the wine many years later. You know, it's a wine like many others that last in time. You don't be scared about forget a Custoza in your cellar, because you can really enjoy even more, because time allows the wines to open and develop that mineral stuff and potential of the territory for me and like for my colleagues in general. So, but I let you explain the wines because you are much more better than me, and I would love to hear your impression.
One quick question for you. You mentioned the regular Custoza. You're meaning the blended, not single vineyard San Michelin Custoza. Do you make a Superiore as well?
Exactly. I have 3 Custoza DOC, or better, sorry, 2 Custoza DOC and 1 Superiore.
Thank you. As we move into the distinctly yellow fruits here, we're certainly dealing with a riper expression here. This is not the only late harvest wine in the flight, but you can get a sense that there's a greater degree of ripeness here. Notice also the level of acidity perhaps is just a mark lower than we've had on previous wines. There's an exoticism, there's a voluptuousness to this wine. There's a concentration and wonderful palate length as well. Remember, let the wine roll over your palate for a little while and get it just luxuriate in the texture here.
Henry, what I love from this wine is that the opening is very sweet with Williams ear and white fruit, and when you taste it, arrive after the rose pamplemousse with a little of bitterness, and is a so particular expression of this wine. The connection of the terroir is this sensation of quite salty, but just at the end of the wine, and is very, very well balanced for me.
Really, really well said, Costantino. Again, just to underscore, Costantino made what I think is one of the best things about Italian wines, red or white, is this counterpoint, this play between the sweet, fruity on one side and the savory. And I think you actually used the word bitter. And in this case, it's not unpleasantly bitter. Think olive oil. Think sometimes olive oil that has this counterpoint as well. And this wine does that wonderfully, where you have this line that runs right through the middle of the wine, adding a savory counterpoint. This wine is about volume. This wine is about volume. It's got high levels of fruit, a very intense floral aromas, complexity of both of those fruit and floral aromas, and it can stand a little bit of savory counterpoint, and it shows that off with, again, suggestions of flint, wet stone, and even suggestions of if not toast, then perhaps hints of cereal or lees derived aromas as well. There's, again, the fruity and the floral underscored by all of this savory, and the volumes are there, and the counterpoints are there, and your palate is, I guess, reacting from one to the other, even though the wine is extremely well balanced, but also in harmony as well. Wonderful integration, gravitas and concentration here. And mind you, we certainly set the order of the flight in consideration of the nature of these wines. Again, we're not dealing with a Custoza DOC, we're dealing with a single vineyard expression that certainly is showing off the intention of Roberta in this case. And I think you pulled it off quite nicely. Congratulations, delicious wine.
Appreciate it.
Nevertheless, you see we're maintaining the signature. We're not dealing with overtly aromatic varieties, but these varieties and this blend does have that signature note of whether it's white flowers or moving into something more exotic and more expressive, complemented by typically a level of fruitiness that stops, if you will, somewhere in that orchard fruit realm. Maybe there were suggestions of exoticism in the prior wine, but we're distinctly in white orchard fruit, perhaps suggestions of yellow orchard fruit as well. But there are limits, I think, to that spectrum that Custoza expresses. And I think in that sense, there is a wonderful identity that we've seen so far. So we're going to make a pivot here, because we're leaving Custoza DOC into we're staying Custoza DOC, we're moving into the superiore category. And as I mentioned, as I suggested earlier, I think there's a qualitative and also an intentional leap that's being made when producers are making a Custoza superiore in this case. So we'll introduce our next wine. This is the wine I mentioned before. It was the winner of the Wine Spectator Top 100 this year for their 2019 vintage. I think, in fact, it's that wine that we're tasting now. And I see somebody from Monte del Fra is here. Ciao.
Hello, good evening. Good evening, thank you.
Hi.
Yeah, we are so proud about this last surprise that the Wine Spectator deserved us, also because For us, Cadelmagro is a sort of icon. Does it mean that for my family represent a sort of dialogue in between two generations, and the teachment that from a father to another father was transmitting the knowledge of our territory, of our terroir, how we have to vinify the grapes. And Cadelmagro is also a specific single vineyard. So it's an old vineyard that gives a lot of character to the style of the Garganega, of the Trebbianello Toscano, the Cortese, the Incrocio Manzoni grape. What we like in this wine, it's that the fashion, the complexity starts to develop not now, but in the future. So it's also a sort of a way to stress that the Custoza is something of rich, is something of complex, is something that has a lot of things to explain in a glass of wine in the future. So it's a wine for gourmet people. It's a wine that has a character to explain the terroir and our climate and our grapes. What we try to do in the last years is to apply the rules less is more. So does it mean that we reduce a lot the working in the cellar to represent as much as we can the pure style about this style of grapes? In fact, we vinify every grapes separately and at contact with the lees. But the secret of this wine is also to work in concrete tank. So we use a lot of attention in preserving the characteristic of the harvest also. So you have more indication, terroir, minerality, complexity from the Garganega, perfume from the Bianca Fernanda, character from the age of the vines, but you have also electricity and style that is preserved also from the developing in concrete and not in style. So it's very important for us be in the future more and more purist and represent the power of a territory that has a lot of things to explain in a glass of wine. And especially, as I said, when you give the time to stay in a bottle and not just in a fresh and easy profile. So it's an invite to discover in a different corner what does it mean Custoza word, what does it mean single vineyards, and different expression of different area of the area of Custoza.
Thank you very much.
You're super
welcome.
welcome.
But also, like the other wines in the flight, with the exception of the Cavegat, which is the cooperative winery, all of our wines are family-owned estates. In this case, this is a family-owned winery founded in 1958 with a number of estates throughout the Western Veneto. So let's taste it. Costantino, I think you got started already. Please, you muted yourself.
Costantino, we can't hear you. Sorry.
And here we are really getting to appreciate the.
Okay, you listen.
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry. I says that I know very well Cadelmagro, and I think that is quite a classic style from Superiore. I think that is a very complex wine. With a long history, and also I appreciated what Marika says about the old vines. We can find the imprinting of the old vines in the expression of this wine. That is the sweetness part of the expression that talk with the minerality of the terroir. that's for me is the secret of this wine. Less is more is correct in a winery, and this is the French says haute couture wines, that is very artisanal and is very complex.
I'm Italian and I say Giorgio Armani style.
Certainly there's a level of self-confidence about this wine. And I think it goes to expression of these old vines from this single vineyard. Notably, we made a departure from the fresh and simply fruity style of the young wines, which we previously tasted, and move into an expression of aging here, moving into suggestions of dried fruits, dried pineapple, for example, still have the ripe citrus. There is a new note of elderflower, if you will, as well, and suggestions, if you will, perhaps of even development. At least yesterday in my notes, I'm looking and thinking, well, I don't smell it today, but there was a suggestion of butterscotch, which is so it's reconciled itself. I don't smell it this morning.
It's a very gastronomic wine.
Yeah, we are a gourmet family. So for us, the power of balance, the different matches of food is very important. And I think that for such a small village like Custoza is, it's a very smart wine because it became a very cosmopolitan when you start to matches with different traditional food of different countries. So that's the unique part of working a blend of single grapes. So that's very important.
Thank you. Another notable difference in this wine is if you were curious at all about texture on the previous wines, here we have a texture that's bordering on phenolic, not in a pejorative way, but there is a textural element that's pervades the wine throughout, and it matches up nicely, comes to a point with the acidity on the finish. Again, don't let the richness and exoticism of this wine fool you. The acidity is quite high, medium plus to high, and I'm still salivating even as I'm talking to you. And the wine is still evolving on my palate, even as I'm talking to you as well. There's something to be said for the concentration on this wine that gives you not only the palate length, but the temporal length as well, as far as the extension on the finish here. So congratulations on an excellent wine. And again, I hope the distinction now between Custoza and Custoza Superiore is becoming clear. Again, just to be clear, not to say that the producers we tasted previously do not make Superiore wines. I'm sure their Superiore wines are aspirational in the same sense. But in this case, we happen to have the wine from Monte del Fra, and we'll move along now to our last wine. Grazie. Come ti chiami?
Marika.
Marika, are you a member of the family?
Yes, I'm a member of the family. Yes.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you
for sharing the wines.
Thank you so much. It's a big pleasure. I will wait you in Monte del Fra soon.
Thank you. I hope to be there soon. Moving along now, Menegotti, another family-owned winery. This one founded in the 1950s, making wines throughout Custoza and Bardolino. Interestingly, I had to elbow our friends from Menegotti for a little bit because their text sheet only lists Bianca, Fernanda, and Garganega. I'm like, okay, I'm going to call the wine police if you don't tell me what else is in the blend. They revealed that the varieties are actually 45, 45, and 10 Trebbiano Toscano in this case, for those of you who are looking at your text sheets and wondering, wait a second, that doesn't add up.
And is 18, this wine.
Yes.
Henry.
So the Custoza DOC wines we had were 2020. The Monte del Fra wine was 2019. And this one is 18. So you guys all have the bottles, so you can just turn them over and have a look. But this wine also undergoes a short cryo maceration. This wine actually states that they're fermented in cement as well, and then aged for 2 years, which is quite unusual, I think. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but 2 years for Custoza Superiore,
Yep.
I think, which only requires 12 months, if I remember correctly,
Yeah.
with weekly bâtonnage during the first year. Let's smell and taste it. Now, this wine, perhaps more so than others, leaps out of the glass. If we were giving the intensity of the aromas only moderate to delicate, so to speak, this wine jumps out of the glass. To me, there's a slight, almost petrol character to this wine. That is the first note that I get. Again, the suggestion of dried fruit. Butterscotch, just a hint.
Yeah.
Maybe suggestions of caramel. Even spices, I'm tempted to say vanilla, but vanilla typically takes you to oak, so I won't go there. But notably, there's a exotic richness to this wine.
Yeah.
Rich and round and more distinctly savory.
Yeah, very salted. There's a nice complexity, Henry. I found a lot of yellow fruit and flower, but flower when goes over, and just vanilla and caramel, you say, is perfect for me, but at the end is like a salted caramel.
Sure. I like Costantino's use of the words. He said he meant, I think what you meant to say were faded flowers. So flowers that are a little bit over. Faded flowers, I think, take on a very savory expression. For me, that expression comes off more vegetal, but in a savory way rather than in a pejorative, under-ripe way. Yeah, but I certainly see what you're saying. But again, this development towards dried fruit, while still maintaining a medium plus acidity, which keeps the wine quite fresh. I see also we have a representative from Menegotti.
Yes.
Salve.
Hello. Ciao.
Who are you?
I am Andrea Menegotti, and I am the winemaker of the family. I represent my family. Me and my brother are the third generation of the family. And Elianto is our vision of Custoza terroir, and is not a single vineyard, but the grape come every year from the same two vineyards. Okay. And one for the Garganega and one for the Fernanda. Fernanda for us is very important for this blending, and is a particular part of this hill, on the top of the hill, and is very interesting in the future. No, the aroma is not immediately. You don't find immediately the wine, but the wine need a lot of time and a little bit of time in the glass too, to open the aroma and our characters. Okay, and we work a lot with cement tank and with the yeast in the tank. Is not immediately, no, is not with a classic DOC. With a booth vintage, but is very complex, and we need with the time is ever better, will be better.
Andrea, thank you for being here. I think you said some very interesting and very important things right there. adds a wonderful tie into what we've been tasting today. You said the wine is not immediate. I think what your implication was that the wine takes some time in the bottle to show its development, also takes some time in the glass to show some development. But at the same time, I'm looking at notes that I wrote when I first tasted the wine last night, and which ties into the theme we've been trying to say is that it's not that the blend, it doesn't matter, but that the wines are blends. And in this case, what you've achieved is something so soulful and harmonic that you can't tease apart the flavors and the grapes, nor do you want to, because it's that emotional of a wine, right? I think what you've achieved here is so resonant as a single unity that it underscores the message of what Custoza DOC has said. I mean, as I've learned throughout the week, and as we've tried to reiterate throughout the day. And the idea only came to me now, but the soulfulness, this harmonic character of how these blends can resonate is quite remarkable. So congratulations. Costantino, did you have something to add on this wine?
I have just a question for Andrea, because it is very smooth, the sensation. There's a small skin contact in this wine.
Yes, but it's not with the beer, but is only with the I don't know in English what is the name, una macerazione polposa, no? Without
absolutely.
The skin, only with the fluid, with the most for 1 week.
Is a quite maceration between the liquid part of the wine, and you lose the warm sensation from the skin, and you have this smooth sensation. Is a so particular technique in vinification that I think is important to say to our listener this evening.
Constantine, I think that's a great point. I think that was one of my questions to all of the wineries is, do you perform cryomaceration? And I think the question didn't really go far enough now, did it? Because there are degrees and techniques in cryomaceration that may involve skins, may not involve skins, to achieve whatever result we want. And you're contrasting, I think, in this case, the wine of Monte del Fra, where we did get a distinct phenolic texture, and I think it worked beautifully in that wine, versus Menegotti's technique, where they're not including the skins and just macerating the pulps to give, I guess, more integration in it. So the more information we can get, the more we can understand as far as the artistry behind the wines. I know several of our producers said that they're trying to remove winemaking, but there is an artistry to wine. Every choice that's made, whether it's in the vineyard or whether it's in the winery, is an intervention. And those aren't bad things. Wine doesn't really make itself. And I think we
have a great terroir with a lot of young owners that improve every year the experience and the heritage from the past generation. I think that's another secret of Custoza.
Thank you for that input. I see there's so many questions on the chat, and we'll see if perhaps we should address some of them, because that brings us to the end of our flight. Just on the last question, Brighton Alonso, he had a question about the requirements for Custoza Reserva and Superiore. Brighton, I'll refer you to the actual disciplinare for the DOC. If you type into Google disciplinare and whatever appellation you want, you'll get the actual disciplinary code, and you'll have all of the yields, you'll have all the aging requirements and more information than you can want. What's interesting is that even beyond that technical information, you have more, I guess, I don't know how to put it, romantic literature about human interaction and history and heritage of every appellation. So all the details about yields and aging is in there. I think I don't remember correctly. I can look it up at some point. If you give me a moment, I'll get back to you via this chat. But no, I think
is 120 for the superiore. Is the you mean the quantity, the production?
I'm thinking he might be referring to aging, but it's not a lot. We're talking about months rather than years. It's not that much of a difference in this case. I think it goes from 3 months, 5 months, and 12 months of aging. Again, yeah. No stipulation for oak. So most people see steel or cement in this case.
No.
Right. So I think with that, we'll conclude the presentation. I think the sponsors will be providing copies of this PowerPoint to all of our participants today. If Roberta, if you'd like to say some concluding remarks, I think aside from that, our work is done here.
Yes, I want to provide general info about all for everybody who asked about information, special details about each winery, who is looking for distributors. So I said, as I wrote, we will provide to all of the listeners the details about each winery, so email address, and you can write directly. As well, we will send the link for the registration so they can easily listen again or have more information about. And for any other question, also please feel free to write to the Consortium. So info@Custoza, vinocustoza.it, but we will provide as well the address. From my side, I'm very proud and honored for your own interest and attention. So what I can say in the name of the Consortium, in the name of all my colleagues and winemakers, I invite you all to come and visit us whenever you have the chance, because we really would love you enjoy our land, meet the winemakers, and explore our hospitality. So as you perfectly said, we include 9 municipalities, and we think now Custoza and the land of Custoza in general is a kind of a tourist destination too. So you can spend a holiday among villages and taverna, osteria, and walking path. So of course, see you online for further opportunity to study together the appellation, but even more, you are very welcome to come to visit us. And at the end, I really want to send a big thanks to Henry, because he will did a really great job. And thank you for support and for give this great opportunity to our land to speak through your voice. And it's a very special gift. We really appreciate it. As well, Costantino did his part, even if the electricity didn't work properly, but I think you understand it. Sometimes you cannot do more than what you can.
Harry, apologize me. I'm very, very, very sorry. But it's the first time that I have a problem like this, and I was in the panic. Roberta knows me, and normally I yeah. And I think that Custoza and his producer is a land to discover. Is very near to big cultural cities in Italy like Verona, Mantova, and Garda Lake is a spectacular northern Mediterranean areas in Italy and in Europe, obviously. And I think it is a land to discover, and is a method to discover all the point of view about the vinification of this terroir. The art of blending for us is is an expression, is a liaison with the artisanal point of view of the Italian culture.
Thank you, Costantino. Don't worry, I looked at your bio. You bring a tremendous amount of skill and experience. I know it must have been difficult with all that you've got going on, and it was still, your input was very, very well appreciated in this case. Again, also a big thank you to Roberta. I think what you're doing at the Consortium as far as the messaging, freshness, delicate aromaticity, drinkability, food friendliness is spot on. Sometimes those words seem, can seem trite, but having tasted the wines, you see that they come with a real basis in the reality of what's going on the ground there. So I think there's some messaging that needs to get out to the broader community, but I think there's also an opportunity to show the potential with a category like Custoza Superiore, which I think was quite a surprise and quite a treat for myself, and I'm sure for many of our tasters. So thank you, everyone, again. Thank you to our producers who were able to join us and to add some commentary to the presentation. With that, I will wish you all a good night, good lunch, or wherever you're heading. And we hope to see you all in Italy very soon.
Yeah.
Yes, please do it.
Grazie.
Thank you once again.
Ciao. Happy
Bye.
holidays.
Ciao.